Hello and welcome back to the Darth Magog channel. I'm your host, the Dark Lord of the Apostates, Darth Magog. We've spent a lot of time discussing the harmful dating culture, toxic family relations, and overall harsh childhood conditions within the Jehovah's Witness faith. But that begs the question, how is any of this legal? So today we'll answer a burning question from the community. Why doesn't the government do anything about Jehovah's Witnesses and other cults? We would be honored if you would join us. Special thanks to my pal Flavis for bringing this up. And today they ask, why doesn't the government step in and disband this cult? And Flavis, that's a good question. The answer to that, actually, is that they have. Kinda. So, assuming that you're an American viewer, as the vast majority of my XW agents and other supporters are, then you haven't experienced Jehovah's Witnesses being outlawed. But the truth is, Watchtower and the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses are actually unofficially disbanded in a number of countries and localities around the world. They all vary in severity, but this is true in places like Russia, mainland China, France, and most recently, Norway, as just a handful of examples, though the reasoning varies from government to government. The most common denominator in Jehovah's Witnesses banning around the world is its extremist cult views. As you may be aware, Jehovah's Witnesses are a fundamentalist Christian doomsday religion. Jehovah's Witnesses believe we live in a special time just ahead of the literal end of the world, where the biblical God that they've affectionately referred to as Jehovah will execute the masses along with his son Jesus Christ in an army of angels. The only survivors will be faithful Jehovah's Witnesses, the true Christians according to the religion's own literature. They preach these beliefs door to door in an effort to save people from this fate via conversion. The religion's culture is very insular and centered around the preaching work, often to the detriment of the social, professional, and scholarly lives of its members. The group demands exclusive devotion to the group and its God, or else they risk being excommunicated and ignored by the group in a process they call disfellowshipping. They don't recognize the LGBTQ community as legitimate, ban the use of blood in medical treatments, and even punish members that celebrate birthdays and other secular or non-Jehovah's Witness religious events. There are a few other issues with the group, such as the mandatory child labor, surveillance culture, questionable ways of handling child abuse, and demanding worship schedule, but the biggest issue cited is the involvement of the religion in medical care and mishandling of child predator allegations within the religion. Many cases are so heinous I can't discuss them on camera, but are fortunately finally being punished after some time of being hidden or swept under the rug. So now that you know what the issues are with Jehovah's Witnesses, let's see why Jehovah's Witnesses are banned by governments worldwide, starting with the biggest one on the list, Russia. The Russian government, according to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, has a blanket ban on Jehovah's Witnesses due to extremism. The report details that the Russian government's law against extremism is notably vague and includes the vast majority of religious movements in the country. The most consistent grievance observed is the Jehovah's Witness practice of distributing literature with the intent to proselytize and their stance against participating in politics. As a result, Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia have been subject to raids, arrests, detainment, and even imprisoned based on their faith. Jehovah's Witnesses have seen the Russian ban as a fulfillment of prophecy, however, comparing Russia to the biblical figure the King of the North. The King of the North, a figure in Daniel's prophecy, is a governmental entity that directly oppresses Jehovah's people according to Jehovah's Witness theology. On the other end of the spectrum for bans, France is another European country that also opposes Jehovah's Witnesses, but in a slightly different way. Unlike Russia, Jehovah's Witnesses are free to practice their faith openly. They still preach publicly, they have open kingdom halls and assembly halls, and publicly list their progress in the Jehovah's Witnesses yearly report. Jehovah's Witnesses, however, are officially designated by the French government as a sect, a French word that translates to cult. Other groups on the list include Pentecostal Protestants and Scientology. They're somewhat limited on what they can do, however. Most restrictions are civil. The Watchtower Society and CCJW often have trouble obtaining construction permits according to some reports. There are also troubles with the tax exemption the religion normally enjoys in other countries like Canada and the USA. There are a few other situations like mainland China's blanket ban on all religion, but you get the general gist of things now. So, now that you have a good idea what a ban would look like, let's see if it's worth it. Starting with the upside, banning Jehovah's Witnesses would help out with a few things. One would be a legal precedent for reaching out. This is especially important for children in the religion that may be struggling with their sexuality, domestic abuse, or even in a situation where they're being abused by an adult. This would make it easier for governmental agencies like Child Protective Services to rescue children from toxic environments partially brought about by the religion, and could provide additional legal protections to supporters of said children. The tax benefit would be twofolded. One, with fewer resources, the religion's expansion and plans would be interrupted, hindering their growth and leaving fewer people susceptible to conversion, compliance, and coercion tactics. And without tax-exempt status, tax revenues from a large group like Jehovah's Witnesses that post hundreds of millions of dollars in assets could result in millions in funding for underfunded humanitarian organizations. Or it could be funneled into tax breaks for other groups, but we're talking best-case scenario here. Clear downsides would also emerge from such legislation. For one, even in countries where they're illegal, there are often thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses. The religion gains a stronger, more fervent following as a result of persecution confirming their doctrine. The Jehovah's Witnesses have what can only be described as a persecution complex, as they believe the secular world is under the control of their adversary Satan the devil, the ancient enemy of Jehovah. As a result, they believe any attempt to keep them from practicing their religion is the result of an attack by this fabled spirit creature and his agents as part of a grander plan to fight their god Jehovah for supremacy over the universe, reinforcing their beliefs and distrust in the world around them. The same distrust can prevent members from reaching out for help when they're threatened from within the group and can extend to the internal victimization of the witness. Additionally, as demonstrated in countries with a strong anti-cult movement, there could be physical impacts to members. If Massimo Introvine is to be believed, and frankly I hope he isn't, but if he is to be believed, individual Jehovah's Witnesses in France have been denied employment, housing, and have even been beaten in the streets for their involvement in the religion, and no one deserves that. Especially since it's this Dark Lord's controversial opinion that most Jehovah's Witnesses are grossly misinformed and horribly misled people just doing their best to survive in an uncertain world, with an even more special mention of the children being raised in this restrictive, coercive, high-control religious environment. We've also unfortunately seen the extreme end of poor treatment of witnesses in World War II Germany, and also in the Hamburg and Indian attacks on kingdom halls this past year. Ultimately, there are myriads upon myriads of different ways an American ban of Jehovah's Witnesses could go, but that being said, it's a terribly unlikely event despite public opinion towards cults and high-control religious groups. One of the biggest challenges is defining a cult. Depending on where you go, cults have different definitions. Oxford Dictionary defines a cult as a system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object. That's a very broad definition and frankly could apply to any monotheistic religion. Merriam-Webster defines cult as a religion regarded as unorthodox or spurious. Again, very relative. To a polytheist, worshipping a single deity is highly unorthodox. To a Christian, marrying a cousin is unorthodox, as opposed to a Torah law approving such a practice. A generally accepted system for determining if a group is a cult is Professor Stephen Hassan's BITE model. The BITE model determines cult status based on the degree of control the group exerts over its members, whether it be via social pressure or even physical assertion. The metrics are behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, but this is not an official government metric to measure by. But the biggest barricade for an American XJW like myself or another cult survivor would be the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, the right to assembly, the press, and most importantly for today's discussion, religion. The United States government, by its own laws, is prevented from making an overarching distinction on which religion is right or wrong, meaning you can worship however you want. that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want under the banner of religion. The Jehovah's Witnesses are learning that lesson the hard way in Pennsylvania at the moment. But just because a religion has a harmful practice doesn't mean it can be banned. The US, however, has banned specific practices of certain religions and cults. The Latter-day Saints, for example, better known as the Mormons, were the standard for the 1878 Supreme Court case on having multiple wives. The Jehovah's Witnesses were at the center of a case regarding selling pamphlets door to door, forcing the witnesses to revise their doctrine to support handing out literature for free of charge to everyone. So stronger child labor laws, mandatory reporting of child predators, and better protection of abuse victims would go a long way in taking down these harmful cults without banning them outright, thereby protecting the religious freedoms of the people while also offering justice and protection to the cult's victims. After extensive review, I think the best way to ban Jehovah's Witnesses is to try the Norway solution. For the uninformed, on January 27th of 2022, the Norwegian government began the process of deregistering Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion. Well, not quite, it's a bit more complicated than that. Normally, religions in Norway are entitled to a state grant based on their membership. This also applies to humanist organizations as well, the closest analog being something along the lines of tax exemption for churches and charities here in the United States of America. But in Norway, the taxpayers support these religions more directly. But there's a caveat to this. Your organization can't commit acts of violence, coercion, and violate the rights and freedoms of others, principal among these being children. Now, as we discuss frequently on this channel, Jehovah's Witnesses only follow the law as far as they have to, so long as it doesn't violate what they call God's law. Meaning they'll continue to practice anything they determine to be biblical, even if it violates a secular law. This includes hosting worship meetings, reading and distributing their own literature, and their practice of disfellowshipping. And while Norway has no qualms about the literature and the peaceful assemblies, they do have a big problem with disfellowshipping as it pertains to one group: children. So I'm sure you probably put this together, but if you haven't, Jehovah's Witnesses include children in all their worship activities, including baptism. Children as young as 7 years old have joined the religion officially through water baptism. You can make an argument over whether the choice is of free will or if it's coercion based on the environment these children grow up in. I've got a great series of videos on the subject with a childcare expert if you're new to the channel. You can check those out in the upper right hand corner of the screen. But for the sake of efficiency, being baptized as a Jehovah's Witness affords you all the privileges and punishments of being one. So in a child's case, should they violate the rules of the religion and they're determined to be insufficiently sorry, they can be disfellowshipped and shunned like their adult counterparts, meaning that all their Jehovah's Witness friends and family would functionally treat them like they don't exist. The organization does outline some things for a minor child, like the parents being required to provide for them until the age of majority, but spiritual association is limited if not forbidden, and anyone outside of the house, relative or not, would also be forbidden to associate with said child. Violating a rule in the religion can be a serious thing, such as committing a crime, but other disfellowshipping offenses include premarital sex, even between consenting age-appropriate parties, a consenting non-physically intimate homosexual relationship, overly close associations with outsiders known as worldly people, and even questioning Jehovah's Witness doctrine, a special crime they call apostasy. This apostasy can be as simple as not believing that the Jehovah's Witnesses' New World Translation is a good translation, to something a bit more extreme as wanting to visit another church and even participating in other religious holidays, and therein lies the problem. Because of the practice of disfellowshipping and its consequences being fully imposed on minor children, the religion actively violates children's rights. Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses themselves publicly admit they do so in their own literature, on their public-facing website, through articles about disfellowshipping. So, as a consequence, Norway has deregistered the Jehovah's Witness religion. But it's not a blanket ban like in World War II Germany or modern-day Russia. No, Jehovah's Witnesses get to keep their kingdom halls. They can produce and distribute literature. They can preach, minister, and conduct Bible studies. They can continue to raise their children in the faith. It's just that the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses and their parent corporation of Watchtower Bible and Tract Society won't get any government subsidies. Just shy of 1.8 million US annually in Norway. And I think that's just perfect. Now, the Watchtower is fighting this deregistration effort to this day, and last I checked, losing on every battlefront. And that's because there's no significant harm being done to the members of the religion in this action. Witnesses aren't being hunted down in the streets or having their homes burned in Norway. They aren't barred from public school nor gainful employment. They retain all their rights as individuals. It's just the religion itself that's being punished monetarily. As much as I'd like to see some serious legislation against specific practices in the religion, like child baptism, disfellowshipping, and their terrible CSA policy and judicial committees, hitting them where it hurts really does well to expose the religion. The Watchtower is fighting for about $1.7 million in Norway, 10 times harder than it ever fought for the protection of the children who were harmed in their Australian Royal Commission investigation. And when the world sees that this organization is chasing money after it swept 1,006 odd cases of child abuse under the rug in Australia alone, that'll show what its true goals are. That is truly what we need for now. Norway may set the gold standard for how to handle these harmful high-control groups, and now that we're seeing Jehovah's Witnesses making court appearances in the United States, Spain, New Zealand, and most recently Japan, this may start a trend of pressuring reform in the Watchtower. While the government has to walk a tricky tightrope of free speech, religious freedom, and human rights, it's worth noting that individual activists have a bit more freedom. The court of public opinion is a very powerful tool in facing down cults. The more that we discuss cults, high-control groups, and the abuses they bring, the more we can hinder and halt their growth. So while the government fumbles around carefully worded legislation, we can outwardly use our freedom of speech to voice every travesty that we see in Jehovah's Witnesses in similar groups. Thank you all for watching our video essay. If you value future videos, I'd appreciate a like. And while I don't normally do this, I ask that we share this video specifically if at all possible. Jehovah's Witnesses are a small niche group in the world over, but if we can bring attention to their atrocities, it could set precedent for solving the problems of other organizations like this. Otherwise, until next time, remember XJW agents, the elders may be watching you, but Darth Magog is watching the Watchtower. Bye.